Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at Indigenous Peoples Day. And, not just seeing it as a date on the calendar.
Right.
We really want to unpack what it means, why it feels so significant right now.
Absolutely.
We're using this really thorough guide, Indigenous Peoples Day, a complete educational guide, as our base.
It's a great resource.
Our mission, really, is to get a clearer picture. What is it? Why does it exist? Its relevance today. Maybe uncover some surprising facts along the way.
Sounds good. It's easy for these days to just become, another holiday, but this one, it offers such a critical way to look at history and, well, our present too.
Exactly, going beyond the basics.
Yeah, exploring the roots and why it still matters so much.
Okay, so let's dive right in. What actually sparked this whole move towards Indigenous Peoples Day? Where did it begin?
Well, it's pretty interesting, actually. It really emerged quite directly as a counterpoint to Columbus Day.
A counterpoint, okay.
Yeah, the guide highlights this. It notes the very first sort of formal recognition was in Berkeley, California. That was back in 1992.
1992, and wasn't that the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival?
Spot on. Yes, exactly. That anniversary seems to have been a major catalyst.
You can imagine. It must have sparked a lot of rethinking, a lot of conversation about Columbus's legacy.
Definitely.
Which, let's be honest, is much more complex and often darker than the simple heroic story some of us learn.
Exactly. And the guide, it doesn't really shy away from that. It details Columbus's role in, colonization, the violence, the enslavement,
Right.
the genocide that happened, especially impacting the Taino people in the Caribbean first.
So it's confronting that directly.
Yes. And that's the pivotal point. The narrative shifts, you see. It moves away from celebrating a so-called discovery to actually centering and honoring the really long history, the incredibly rich cultures, and importantly, the resilience of Native peoples across the Americas.
So it's like a deliberate flipping of the script.
Precise.
Focusing not on the arrival of Europeans, but on the people who were already here, their endurance, their contributions.
Yes, honoring their enduring presence.
So what are some of the sort of foundational cultural ideas that this day really tries to emphasize? What's at the core?
The resource lays out a few key pillars, which is helpful. First, there's honoring Native sovereignty,
Okay, sovereignty.
which is all about acknowledging the inherent right of indigenous nations to govern themselves,
Yeah.
their own affairs.
Makes sense.
Then there's decolonization, and that's not just like a historical thing. It's framed as an ongoing process
Ongoing how?
by questioning and actively dismantling those Eurocentric viewpoints and the colonial structures that have really dominated the narrative for so long.
Got it. Challenging the default perspective.
Exactly. And then resilience and continuity are huge,
Yeah.
highlighting the, frankly, remarkable survival and the ongoing vitality of indigenous communities, despite facing just immense adversity.
The we are still here idea.
Precisely. And finally, education and representation. Just stressing how crucial it is to have a more accurate understanding of history and to, amplify indigenous voices everywhere.
That framework makes a lot of sense. It's acknowledging the past, definitely, but it's also very much about the present and the future of Indigenous peoples.
Absolutely. It connects it all.
So how has this recognition actually spread since, those beginnings in Berkeley back in '92?
Well, the growth has been pretty significant. Our guide mentions that as of 2024, we're looking at over 20 states and more than 130 cities across the U.S. recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day in some official way.
Wow, over 130 cities. That's quite a shift.
It really is. Now, it's not a federal holiday yet. That's important to note.
Right. Still designated as Columbus Day federally?
Correct. But it has received presidential proclamations, which is a step, and their support for it in Congress. So that growth really points to perhaps a broader shift in understanding, maybe a greater willingness to confront those older historical narratives.
Yeah, that momentum at the state and local level is really interesting. Does the guide mention if this kind of recognition is happening elsewhere, internationally?
It does, yeah. And it's helpful to see the connections. If you look globally, you see similar movements in other countries grappling with their own colonial histories.
Like where?
The guide points to Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, for instance. And Australia has NAI Dios Week. In New Zealand, there's Waitangi Day.
Ah,
So these are all examples of nations, finding their own ways to create space to honor and acknowledge their indigenous populations. Different context, but a similar underlying goal.
Right. So how does this actually look on the ground? When the day comes around, how is Indigenous Peoples Day typically observed or celebrated?
There are several key ways mentioned in the guide. Ceremonial gatherings are really central. These often involve things like drumming, traditional dances, singing, spiritual ceremonies, often led by community elders.
A real focus on cultural practice.
Definitely. And educational events are also very common.
Yeah.
Things like workshops, talks by Indigenous speakers, film screenings. There's also a growing push to update school curricula to be more accurate.
That educational piece feels vital.
It really is. Then, in places where Columbus Day is still the main observance, you often see protests and marches, people advocating for that change.
Making their voices heard.
Exactly. And something that's become much more visible lately is the practice of land acknowledgments.
Oh, yeah, you hear those quite often now at events.
Right. Formally recognizing at public gatherings the specific indigenous territories on which the event is happening. It's a reminder of that history right there.
It really is a constant reminder of whose land we're on. Let's maybe dig into some of those cultural cornerstones the guide talks about. Music seems like a big one.
Oh, absolutely. And what's really striking is just the sheer diversity of it all. You have the powerful rhythms of traditional drum music, the really vibrant sounds you hear at powwows,
Mm-hmm.
the very evocative melodies of the native flute. But then you also have this exciting blend with modern genres, rock, hip-hop, electronic music, all infused with indigenous influences.
So traditional and contemporary?
Exactly. The guide mentions some really key artists. You've got Buffy Sainte-Marie, who's been a folk icon and activist for decades.
A legend.
Truly.
Yeah.
Redbone, famous for that huge funk rock hit, Come and Get Your Love.
Oh, I know that one.
Right. Groups like A Tribe Called Red, they're now known as the Hallucination, who create this incredible mix of electronic music and powwow sounds. Very unique.
Yeah, I've heard of them. Powerful stuff.
It is. And Joy Harjo, who is the current U.S. Poet Laureate, is also a celebrated saxophonist. And then there's Frank Walm, who uses hip-hop really effectively for activism.
Wow, quite a range. Are there specific songs mentioned that carry particular weight?
Yes, definitely. The guide points to Buffy Sainte-Marie's My Country, 'Tis of Thy People, You're Dying. It's a really potent critique of historical injustices. Still very relevant.
Powerful title.
It is. And the Hallucinations track, We Are the Hallucination, has kind of become an anthem for many. It's also interesting, the guide notes how older, often, let's say, problematic portrayals, like the song What Made the Red Man Red from Disney's Peter Pan.
Oh, right. Cringeworthy now.
Exactly. Those are now being critically looked at, deconstructed, in light of a better understanding, which is important work.
Definitely. Okay, moving from sound to taste food. What does the guide tell us about indigenous cuisine?
Well, traditional foods are obviously central. The guide highlights the three sisters, that's corn, beans, and squash. They form the agricultural backbone for many indigenous cultures.
The three sisters, I've heard of that. They grow together, right?
Yeah, they support each other. It's a brilliant system. Then you have staples like bison, elk, venison, depending on the region, of course.
Yeah.
And just the bounty of the land, wild rice, maple syrup, cedar tea, all kinds of berries. It shows incredible regional diversity.
Reflecting the specific environments.
Totally. Fry bread is also mentioned. And it's important, the guide notes, to understand its complex history.
Complex how?
Well, it often originated from the limited government rations, flour, lard, sugar, provided during periods of forced displacement and onto reservations. So it has this connection to hardship, even as it's become a cultural staple for many.
Ah, okay. That adds a whole other layer.
It does. And the guide also highlights the growing food sovereignty movement.
Food sovereignty, what's that about?
It's essentially about indigenous communities reclaiming control over their traditional food systems. Getting back to traditional foods, farming practices, having control over their land, their seeds, their water resources. It's about health, culture, and self-determination.
That sounds incredibly important, connecting food back to land and autonomy.
It really is. It links history, health, and the future.
And what about that deep connection to the natural world, more broadly, plants and animals?
Yeah, this is fundamental. The guide lists specific sacred plants, tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, cedar. These are used in vital ceremonies for prayer, for medicine. They're deeply respected.
Used with intention.
Absolutely. And animals hold profound significance too. The bison for plains tribes, representing sustenance and strength. The eagle, symbolizing vision and connection to the creator. Salmon, vital for life in the Pacific Northwest. And the turtle.
Turtle Island.
Exactly.
Sure.
The turtle features in many creation stories as representing North America itself, Turtle Island. And significantly, the guide points out that scientists and environmentalists are increasingly recognizing the value of indigenous land stewardship
How so?
and what's called traditional ecological knowledge, or TEC. This is that deep, long-held understanding of ecosystems and sustainable living, passed down through countless generations. It holds valuable lessons for us all, especially now.
It feels like knowledge that's been overlooked for too long.
Massively.
Yeah.
But it's getting more attention, thankfully.
The guide also shines a light on some influential indigenous figures and also moments in modern pop culture. Who are some of the key people highlighted?
Yeah, some truly inspiring individuals. Wilma Mankiller has mentioned she made history as the first woman principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. Hugely impactful leader.
I remember I am.
Deb Haaland, of course, breaking barriers as the first Native American U.S. cabinet secretary, heading the Department of the Interior. Huge role.
Yes, that was a big moment.
Maria Tallchief, a groundbreaking Osage prima ballerina who really revolutionized American ballet.
Wow, ballet too.
Oh, yes. And we mentioned Joy Harjo, the poet laureate, and N. Scott Momaday, a Kiowa author who won a Pulitzer Prize, really bringing Native American stories into the mainstream literary world.
Powerful individuals, definitely leaving their mark. And how is this showing up in pop culture today? Are we seeing more indigenous stories?
We really are, and it's an exciting shift. The guide highlights the TV series Reservation Dogs.
Oh yeah, heard great things about that show.
It's groundbreaking. Almost entirely indigenous writers, cast, crew. It offers this really authentic, funny, sometimes heartbreaking look at contemporary Native life. Highly recommend it.
Need to check it out.
The film Prey, the Predator prequel, that featured a compelling Comanche protagonist and got huge critical acclaim. That was significant.
Right, set in the past but felt fresh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shows like Rutherford Falls, Molly of Denali, also Native-led, offering diverse and nuanced representation, which is so important.
Moving beyond stereotypes.
Totally. And even on platforms like TikTok. The guide mentions creators like Shayna Nova and Notorious Cree. They're using these platforms in really engaging ways to share their cultures, teach languages, challenge misconceptions.
Using modern tools to share ancient cultures. That's great.
It really is, reaching new audiences.
The guide also mentions some key locations that carry a lot of historical weight. Can you touch on a few of those?
Sure. Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay.
Alcatraz.
Yeah?
The prison.
Yes, but it holds immense symbolic meaning because of the Native American occupation there from 1969 to 1971. It was a major protest demanding recognition of treaty rights, a pivotal moment in modern indigenous activism.
Okay, I didn't know the full story there.
And Standing Rock Reservation, straddling North and South Dakota, that became a global focal point during the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in 2016.
Yes, that was huge news.
Really brought attention to indigenous sovereignty, treaty rights, and environmental protection, water protection specifically. The guide also reminds us of ancient sites Mesa Verde in Colorado, Coquilla Mounds near St. Louis, Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. These just showcase the incredible history and sophistication of indigenous civilizations long before European contact.
Right, evidence of long, complex societies.
Absolutely. And states like Oklahoma, with its unique history as Indian territory, home to 39 federally recognized tribes today. And New Mexico, just so rich in the heritage of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo nations. These places have deep, ongoing significance.
Places that tell a story just by existing. Now, what about some of the language, the key phrases or concepts that are really central to understanding this context?
The guide shares a few really powerful ones. We are still here. Simple, but profound. It's a declaration of survival, of resilience, of continued presence despite everything.
Yeah, that hits hard.
Honor the treaties. This is a constant callback to the legal agreements made between indigenous nations and the U.S. government agreements that have often been broken or ignored. It's about justice and accountability.
A demand for promises kept.
Exactly. And decolonize your mind. This is more inward-looking, a call for everyone, indigenous and non-indigenous, to critically examine and actively unlearn the dominant colonial narratives we've absorbed.
Challenging our own assumptions.
Precisely. The guide also stresses the vital work of indigenous language revitalization.
Keeping languages alive.
Yes, so many communities are working incredibly hard to reclaim languages that were deliberately suppressed, often through things like the boarding school system. It's about cultural survival.
And the land back movement?
Yes, land back is a really crucial contemporary movement. It advocates for the literal return of stolen lands to indigenous stewardship and sovereignty. It's about restoring that connection and self-determination.
These concepts really frame the ongoing struggles, don't they? What are some of the most pressing modern-day issues the guide highlights?
It summarizes several critical areas.
Yeah.
Land and environmental justice are huge. Ongoing fights to protect sacred sites. Oak Flat in Arizona, Mauna Kea in Hawaii are examples.
Still happening now.
Absolutely. And indigenous communities are often on the front lines of climate change activism, bringing that traditional ecological knowledge, that tech, to the fight.
Using ancient wisdom for modern problems.
Exactly. Legal battles and treaty rights are also a constant. Cases like McGirt v. Oklahoma, which reaffirmed reservation boundaries in Oklahoma, has huge implications. And the ongoing debates around the Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA.
ICWA, that's about keeping Native children with their families and tribes, right?
Yes, exactly. Protecting family and cultural connections. It's faced legal challenges.
No.
And finally, health, education, and equity. Addressing major health disparities, confronting the trauma from the boarding school era. There's a big movement for truth and healing there, and the constant need for accurate, respectful representation in schools.
So many interconnected challenges.
They really are. Deeply systemic issues.
It's really striking, though, how the guide points to the role of young people in tackling these issues.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly inspiring. The guide mentions figures like Autumn Peltier, an Anishinaabe water protector who's spoken internationally about the need for clean water since she was very young.
Wow.
And Quanah Chasing Horse, who uses her platform as a model to advocate passionately for climate justice and indigenous sovereignty. They're powerful voices.
Young people leading the way.
Definitely. And indigenous youth are active in tribal governments, leading environmental projects, and the impact of digital activism is huge.
Like we talked about with TikTok.
Exactly. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, young creators are using these tools brilliantly, sharing culture, teaching language snippets, raising crucial awareness about vital issues like MIWG2S,
MIWG2S.
missing and murdered indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It's a devastating crisis, and social media has been key in bringing attention to it.
A way to bypass traditional media sometimes.
Absolutely. The guide even suggests practical things for classroom engagement, like using interactive land acknowledgement maps online, playing indigenous music, learning basic language phrases, researching tribal governments, reading key books like We Are Water Protectors, or Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, or Fry Bread. Bring it into education.
Making it real for the next generation. So important. As we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key reflections or maybe critical thinking points the guide leaves us with?
It poses some really fundamental questions, the kind that stick with you. It asks, what does it actually mean to discover land that was already inhabited by thriving societies?
Yeah.
Really makes you question that word, discovery.
Right. Changes the whole frame.
It does. And it asks, why is it so important whose story gets told, and crucially, who gets to tell it? Highlighting the power dynamics in narrative.
Who holds the microphone, essentially?
Exactly. And then, more practically, it prompts us to think, how can we genuinely honor indigenous peoples, not just on this one holiday, but every single day, pushing for ongoing learning and respect?
These are big questions. They really challenge us. And if people listening want to continue exploring this, what resources does the guide recommend?
It points to some excellent ones. Native Land Digital, that website, native-land.ca, has an amazing interactive map. You can type in your location and see the traditional indigenous territories. Really eye-opening.
I've used that. It's fascinating.
Isn't it? Illuminative has mentioned they're a native-led organization doing great work to increase visibility and challenge stereotypes in media. And for ongoing learning, it suggests things like NPR's Code Switch podcast, the brilliant PBS series Native America, and the All My Relations podcast, which is hosted by Indigenous women and covers a huge range of topics.
Fantastic. Lots of ways to keep learning. Before we finish completely, let's just hit a few of those interesting facts the guide sprinkled in. They often add good perspective.
Sure. A few quick ones. There are over 570 federally recognized tribes in the U.S. alone. Just think about that diversity, unique languages, cultures, histories within that number.
It's not monolithic at all.
Not even close. And the diversity within Alaska, Native peoples, and Inupiat, Yupik, Aleut, and many others is often overlooked. It's vast. Also, this idea of recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day is international, as we touched on, just under different names, like in Canada. And the application of indigenous knowledge, tech's growing in importance in fields like climate science, conservation, sustainable agriculture. It's being seen as vital.
That's encouraging.
And the rise of indigenous youth activism globally is truly inspiring.
Okay, maybe just one or two more quick ones.
Right. Crucially, remember, Christopher Columbus never actually set foot on the land that is now the continental United States. That's a common misconception.
Good fact to remember.
Despite everything, over 170 native languages are still spoken today in the U.S., and there are passionate revitalization efforts happening.
Hopeful.
Yes. The Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in D.C. is an incredible resource and testament to enduring cultures. And lastly, the Navajo Nation covers a land area larger than several U.S. states and maintains significant self-governance.
Wow. Important context. Okay, so as we wrap this up, if there's one key thing listeners should take away about Indigenous Peoples Day, what would you say it is?
I think the most vital takeaway is that this day is so much more than just swapping one holiday name for another. It's really a critical chance and invitation maybe to understand our shared history more accurately, to truly honor the ongoing resilience and the vibrant, living cultures of Indigenous peoples, and also, importantly, to engage with the real issues and challenges their communities continue to face today. It's about the past, present, and future.
It really does reframe things, doesn't it? It invites a deeper look. On that note, maybe a final thought for you, our listener. Really consider the narratives you've been taught about the history of this land, whose voices were central in those stories, and perhaps more importantly, whose were pushed to the margins or silenced altogether. What might we all learn if we actively sought out and truly valued those missing Indigenous perspectives, not just today, but every day?
A powerful thought to end on.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.